Hello, my name is David Brett. I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times. My question for you today is, has the Kamloops First Nation backed down on its 2021 claim that there were the remains of 215 children found in front of the Kamloops Indian Residential School? My answer to that is, in my opinion, yes. They have backed down, they have flinched, if you will, in this standoff between people demanding clarity and ground truthing of the anomalies. And it comes by breaking news. Yesterday, February 17th, the Kamloops First Nation put out a 2-page statement, which what they called the, quote, best current understanding of the investigative work that they say they have been doing since 2021 up till now. However, I must say, this 2-page announcement is almost comically confusing. It is the definition of beating around the bush, dancing around the subject, muddying the waters. However, even though the wording of the release is maddeningly confusing and difficult to understand, if you read between the lines, you can clearly see they are maneuvering themselves to a place where they are going to back down from their original claims. So, what is in this 2-page announcement? I'd like to get into that in some detail. However, just an explanation of where we're standing today. We're back at the New Westminster Senior Secondary School. I'm standing on a playing field, and in the background is what's called Mercer Stadium. We're here because, as we did a few months ago, we compared and contrasted the archaeological work done in Kamloops in 2021 to a 2016 archaeological project that was completed here on the school grounds because of the suspected possible unmarked graves that were here. And in the background, back in 2016, there were small excavators literally digging up the playing field, the football field behind me here, based on what was called ground penetrating radar. So what I'm going to do is explain a little bit more about yesterday's announcement and what's in it, continue to compare and contrast it to what was done here in 2016, and also compare it to the Sarah Beaulieu report that was released. I can't even call it a report. It's a 14-page PowerPoint presentation compared to the very fulsome Golder report of some 150 pages. So, what does the announcement say? Well, I'll try to get to the salient points. The salient points are that they said they clearly indicate they have not completed any excavations of any of the anomalies. What they have done is they say additional ground penetrating radar. They have done LiDAR, which is a laser technology that maps the surface of the earth, exposing surface features that could indicate old houses or geological features. But they also deployed what are known as cadaver dogs, which have been proven to be quite successful in locating even historic graves. So what did all this work amount to? So this is the confusing part. In a section they call Update. So they use the words complex. They say it turned out to be more complex than they thought. So I will just read to you some of the words that are said. So it says, The data and findings from all three unique investigative methods overlap in several areas, indicating, with italics, those zones should now be the primary focus. In other words, some zones, not focus. These zones, primary focus. So it indicates that some areas have been eliminated from focus that were previously in focus. Additionally, the radar and laser scanner ruled out the presence of utility lines and clay tiles in those locations. So you can see why that sentence, the way it is worded extremely carefully, could be misinterpreted or interpreted in many ways, but I think this is the correct interpretation. When it says those locations, is referring back to the zones that should be the primary focus. This, to me, seems like an admission that some of the survey area in question was, as suspected, underlain by drain tiles. So, in the book Grave Error, there was a section, a chapter in the book that famously, and other experts have come forward over the years to say, well, wait a minute, there was a septic field there in the orchard, and that was not taken into consideration in 2021. Well, now, without admitting anything, they seem to be very carefully acknowledging that not all the areas that were surveyed originally should be focused on. In other words, they're being ruled out. So it further says in another bullet point, signatures that resemble burials were found in some areas. Some areas. Not all areas. So this is part of the sort of mind-numbing confusion of this announcement. Whereas the original 2021 announcement said there was a survey area and 215 suspected burials were found, or probable burials were found. And this ignited the world on fire. This announcement, it was originally called a mass grave, then they backed off of that. So here's a statement, and this, keep in mind, is what they call the best current understanding. Signatures that resemble burials were found in some areas. So that, to me, is an admission that the burials were not found in all the areas that were initially indicated. It further states, some areas were ruled out as burials, while others cannot confidently be ruled out. Again, some areas. So this whole news release, this update, the best current information, does not give any specifics as to the amount of the area, the size of the area, the suspected number of graves, the number of graves that may be subtracted from the original total. There's no indication of numbers whatsoever. So what this means is that the announcement does not reference 215, doesn't reference 200, doesn't reference any number. So it seems that based on this announcement, they're claiming no numbers. Before, numbers very almost super confidently stated as almost proven. Now we have this backing off, unwinding, but yet very vague and muddy disclosure. So the rest of the release talks about the Catholic school records and somewhat goes on a bit of a rant about blaming the ecclesiastical organizations and the government for failing to provide or being slow in providing information. It also talks about the cultural protocols related to the potential remains that may be found at the site. And this is, again, the sort of assumptive nature of their disclosures heretofore is that they say, well, the child remains, there's 38 different First Nations involved from many, over 100 different communities. Well, we have to observe all of their cultural protocols for repatriating the remains. It assumes that there are remains. So that kind of assumptive behavior, disclosure, if you will, is consistent with what happened in 2021. And that's where I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about the difference between what happened here in Westminster that triggered this significant report by Golder Associates published in 2017. If you haven't seen our other video on this, I would highly recommend it. But in that video, we talked about how this is 10th Avenue to my right here, and in that direction is what we used to be called Douglas Road, is now called 8th Street. The whole of 8th Street was lined with cemeteries, historic cemeteries, the New Westminster Community Cemetery, the Douglas Cemetery, the Pauper's Field. And right about where I'm standing, that way just a little bit, what was called the Chinese Cemetery. So it was believed that because there was a smallpox or there was a hospital built here, that maybe there were some burials scattered in and around this area. So to the question of the protocols. So the announcement from the Kamloops yesterday talks about, well, the protocols, and they're worried about the protocols, and they have to, all this time going to be taken. Well, the protocols are already set out in regulation in the province of BC to what you have to do. And here's the thing that I think is very important for everyone in the public to understand about what's going on here with this quote-unquote archaeology. In the case of New Westminster, the cemeteries and the suspected burials and all the Indigenous concern, in order to proceed with an archaeological dig, it can't be willy-nilly everywhere. A permit has to be issued under the Heritage Conservation Act regulations as governed by the BC Archaeology branch. So that was done here in Westminster, and permissions and permit applications were sent to the First Nations, and 3 or 4 of them responded and provided those permits. And the GPR work and the subsequent borehole testing and the excavations occurred under the auspices of the conditions of those permits. And those conditions of those permits included all of the protocols, all of the First Nations engagement. They had First Nations monitors looking at and observing the excavations as they occurred, so that if any human remains were found, the protocols could kick in at that point. So here's the big difference that I don't think the public fully understands. The Kamloops Residential School alleged graveyard in the orchard is on an Indian reservation. Indian reservations in BC are not covered by the Heritage Conservation Act. No such permit is required. There's no federal regulation that engages on an Indian reserve. So as such, the First Nation in this case, or in any case on a reservation, can do whatever they want. There are no guidelines. There are no professional standards. There's no developed protocols at all. So to a certain extent, they have a cloak of secrecy that they are able to hide behind. Now, they don't have to hide behind a cloak of secrecy. They could be as transparent as they could possibly be. But they have clearly chosen to go a path that is not in keeping with the normal standards for archaeological investigations in British Columbia. And you think if that's maybe sounds too harsh, well, if we just look quickly at the Dr. Sarah Beaulieu report from, this is not a report, I keep saying report, but I have to clarify, it's not a report. It is a 14-page PowerPoint presentation. Importantly, Sarah Beaulieu was not a member of the BC Association of Professional Archaeologists. Like most professional associations, they have codes of conduct. They have rules and regulations and standards that they must follow. One of those standards in the code of the professional archaeologists concerns public disclosure. And public disclosure of archaeological information has to be done with the permission, in the case of First Nations. You can't just go blurting out information. You have to get the requisite permissions. But importantly, it must be impartial. You cannot just put out a biased report. So the Beaulieu report is in no way whatsoever impartial. I'll just read one little section of what she says in the report. She says remote sensing such as GPR is not necessary to know that children went missing in the Indian residential schools context. This fact has been recognized by Indigenous people for generations, and it goes on. Remote sensing, such as GPR, merely proves some spatial specificity to this truth. So in other words, why did they do the GPR in the first place? So here you have a college professor saying, this is I've taken the representations of my client, I've accepted them as fact. I have not done any research to prove that they're fact. I'm just taking it on face value that all of the statements about unmarked graves are true. And then it's called confirmation bias. That's the last thing you want in a geophysical study. So that is the update. You have a announcement by the Kamloops Indian band that does not include any numbers, and importantly, there is a trove of documents that was requisitioned under Freedom of Information rules by a reporter organization called Blacklock's Reporter. Those documents are set to be disclosed and released to the public on February 20th, a couple of days from now. So could it be that this announcement by the Kamloops is just sort of setting the stage for them to sort of further back down and sort of deal with the information that's going to come to light? Or are we going to have a situation where the documents are so heavily redacted, there's no new information? Well, I think there's going to be a conflagration of sorts that's going to come up. Meanwhile, as we know, following the 2021 announcement of mass graves, there was a national hysteria. There was churches were burned, flags at half-mast. Millions and even billions of dollars have flowed from taxpayers and corporations to First Nations with the backdrop of this genocidal accusation that a church-run school literally murdered hundreds of children and covered it up. So almost 5 years on, it appears that that is unwinding. But we're no doubt going to find out more information. And no doubt very troubling to the residents of Kamloops in the general area, the Kamloops First Nation filed a land claim in 2015 that's winding its way through the courts. That is a very broad claim to every square inch of private Crown land, every single mine in the area. The nation is out there trying to do damage control and kind of spin it as, well, we're not interested in private property. Similar to the Cowichan case, where they said, well, we're not interested in people's private property. That was a public relations gambit. It's a communications strategy. It's strategic communications. So it's not going to be very comforting to the people of Kamloops. The claim covers the entirety of the city and every square inch of land on it, and all the mines in the area. They're saying that, oh, well, the Mines Act doesn't apply in our territory. Well, what about all the tens and millions and billions of dollars of minerals that have already been extracted? Are they going to be looking for a piece of that? Clearly, the implications of all this are very profound. If it's found that the initial claim was misleading, and I'll leave you with that. And I think this is why it is so troubling that you have this charge of residential school denialism, as if it's tantamount to Holocaust denial, that you have these very egregious labels applied to people who are questioning whether or not the Graves claim was true. It should be a question of science. The profession of archaeology is a profession. So what is clearly the case is the initial work in 21 was not done, in my opinion, professionally. It was not required to raise to any professional standards. There's been no permits applied for to excavate. They don't have to apply. There's nothing compelling them to apply for any permits. So whereas here in New Westminster, all of the 38 some anomalies that were outlined in the Golder Report were found to have no indication of human burials or human remains whatsoever. The suspected burial sites were found to be spurious. So this, and all of the First Nations, including the Chilcotin First Nation, who believes that one of their chiefs is buried here, Chief Han, and they insisted that the school behind me, that was the new school that was built, be named after Chief Han. There's no evidence that he's buried here. So there you have it. You have a 2021 claim that an archaeological study was done, and it wasn't really an archaeological study at all. Why would you do ground penetrating radar and not excavate? Those two things are part and parcel. You don't do one without the other. So if they knew, if Sarah Beaulieu, as she states, knew for sure, 100%, that the graves were there based on what she was told by the people, why would you do GPR at all? What's the point? Clearly the point was to create what I talked about in another video some time ago, was a mind bomb. It is to communicate through the mass media a visual and psychologically horrendous set of facts that will propagate through the mass media worldwide. So finally, what I'll say, who's really to blame here? It's the media. The mass media. We're a media outlet. We're not a mass media outlet. I'm not on television. We're not CNN. We're not even global TV or CTV. So the mass media took this information and propagated it and never questioned it. Why? Isn't that the role of the media, to ask questions? Well, it's because the journalists themselves wanted it to be true. It fit a narrative that's in their minds about colonialism, the capitalist, colonialist, oppressive system of marginalizing people. This predominant, prevailing narrative is taught in schools. It's in universities. It's in high schools. So the journalists who come through that system, this is just confirming what they want to be true. They want to condemn the Canadian colonial project. They want us to show it as being genocidal. That's what they want. So naturally, when they heard this information, they backed off any probing questions, which we now can see. I mean, the PowerPoint presentation is a complete joke. It's not professional. The Golder Report is a proper archaeological investigation. This is not a report. It's a bad PowerPoint presentation that really wouldn't even, it's like first year university, maybe high school level. So why wouldn't that be questioned? Well, hopefully there will be more questions asked. My name is David Brett. I'm the editor of the Westminster Times. If you like our journalism, if you appreciate what we're doing, I invite you to support our work. You can go to our website, newwesttimes.com. Up in the right-hand corner, there's a button that says support our work. If you would feel so inclined, we would really appreciate it. We do have costs, and all your support is much appreciated. Thanks for watching.